I think there's a good chance that she re-signs with the Mercury in this upcoming free agency, and I say that because Kelsey Kelsey wants to be able to play her brand of basketball, but she also wants to win. And if she's looking at situations around the W that for franchises, and you factor in the fact that most teams just sign players to multi-year deals after the CBA, the historic CBA that they just agreed to, there's not going to be a ton of teams that you can go to and say, I can see myself going here and we can make some noise next season that gives us a chance at contending for a championship. I think that's in favor of the Mercury.
What's up, everyone? This is Noa Dalzell, and I'm here with another episode of WNBA Today on CLNS. We're going to talk Phoenix Mercury, but also a whole bunch of other WNBA things with a very special guest joining us today, Stephen PridGeon Garner. Stephen, how's it going today?
I'm doing well, Noah. How you doing?
I'm doing well. Amid all the chaos and all the things that have happened in the WNBA off the court, which we're not going to get too into today, it's been a really fun season of basketball too. And so as someone who has spent a lot of time watching games this year, I've really enjoyed kind of that experience. You're based in Phoenix, right? And you cover the Mercury first and foremost. I'd love to start there and then we can get into everything else. But since it's your first time joining the show, how did you get involved in even covering the WNBA and in this world in the first place?
Yeah, so just kind of long story short, I went to school for sports journalism. I'm from Chicago, Illinois. Went to college at Illinois State University, graduated in 2018. Specifically majoring or minoring in sports journalism. So just kind of focusing on things, looking at obviously basketball, but generally all sports through that lens of reporting. And then opportunity came up a few years down the line after graduation, where I had an opportunity to kind of cover the Suns and the Mercury here in Phoenix. So now I'm covering the Suns, the Mercury, as well as the Chicago Sky, keeping my ties back home a little bit too, all in kind of one sweeping blow. So to say I'm busy is an understatement, but we do it because we love it. And it's fun to especially be involved with the WNBA side of things. Being involved before it became quote unquote popular to cover the W. I'm grateful and thankful for my mom as well as one of my uncles who coached basketball when I was younger on the women's side specifically. And they always made sure that if I was telling them that I loved basketball, that there was another side of basketball that doesn't get the attention it deserves. So was always aware of the happenings of girls basketball when I was in high school, and then women's basketball once I transitioned to college, and obviously once I just kind of became an adult. So it's been fun to kind of have that journey, see the way things have played out, see so many different players that I watched in college 5, 10, 15 years ago have long-lasting careers like someone like DeWanna Bonner or other players that have kind of grown to fame more recently and just kind of been able to see them kind of come up from their grassroots stage. So it's been fun. Love basketball in general, and the women's basketball game needs more attention.
Yeah, that's awesome. I appreciate you kind of hearing that backstory. And you had a very interesting season last year, right? Covering a team that made it to the WNBA finals. I probably wouldn't have projected that they would get there. And then you think to yourself, okay, they lost some pieces, but also they still have a lot of talent. What is this year going to look like? And a lot of people that listen to this podcast know that I cover the WNBA at large, but I also cover the Celtics as a beat reporter. So I know both experiences of looking at the league kind of in a bigger picture term, and then also being on the ground around a team. And when a team goes to the finals, you think you're going to probably run that back or at least have another really good season following that. And obviously that has not been the case for the Mercury this season. They've been one of the less good teams in the league. And so we could probably talk about it for hours because it's never as simple as just one thing. But when people ask you like, hey, Stephen, you covered the Mercury last year and they were really good and now they're not. And it's, same coach, a lot of the same key players, not all. How do you explain it? How do you explain the kind of backslide that this team underwent from last year to this year?
Yeah, I start with maybe the biggest thing for me before diving into the details is that last season, Phoenix was one of those teams that had one of those specific characteristics that a team that usually nets itself a finals appearance has. And that's the figure it out factor. So everybody's figure it out is different from another teams. Sometimes for some teams it's injury. Sometimes it's a bunch of new players. Sometimes it's a new coach. Sometimes it's schedule adversity, having more back-to-backs than other teams and things like that. Sometimes for some teams it's just a one sweeping blow of all of those things in one. And that's kind of what it was for the Mercury in multiple respects last season. Didn't have Kalia Copper for about half of the season. Starting center Natasha Mack missed a quarter and some change of the season. Sammy Whitcomb missed some time. Satu Sabali missed time. Like there was a ton of things happening, but at the core foundation of the Mercury team last season, they were able to just figure it out. There's a game, I think end of June, early July last season where they're in a situation where they're going against, I think, the number one team in the W and in the conference at that time, the Minnesota Lynx. At home, it was a camp day game, so you have injury adversity operating without Satu Sabali or Kalia Copper. You have the schedule adversity having a noon game against the best team in the league at that time, and you get into a kind of mud fight with the Minnesota Lynx, and Alyssa Thomas essentially stamps her MVP validity and storming a comeback and spearheading a comeback for them to ultimately win that game at home. And that was like just one of the loudest examples of them just figuring it out. Got down almost double digits in the fourth quarter, stormed back, led by Alyssa Thomas, scoring and assisting her teammates, and they find themselves compiling stops in that process too, and they ultimately win that game. That's one example, and we saw that naturally copy and paste into the playoffs itself against the New York Liberty as well as the Minnesota Lynx again. They just did not have that this season comprehensively. They showed it in pockets, but they did not show it in a sustainable manner. And I start there before looking at other things. But I'm curious for you, is that something that kind of stood out to you when you've just kind of been able to see Mercury games this season?
Yeah, I think you explained it really well. Like sometimes teams just have this will and this way to be able to win. And I feel like this year watching them play, you didn't see that as much, especially early on. And it was a little bit inexplicable at times. I feel like individually, like obviously Kalia Copper has a rough shooting start to the year. I think Alyssa Thomas is not quite as impactful as she was a year or two ago, which is a very extremely high bar, right? MVP level candidate. But even still, I don't know that it makes sense to me that it was such a step back where it's like now we're talking about them being one of the worst teams in the WNBA. And that's why it feels to me like every time I watch them play, I feel like I'm missing something. And that's always the question that I like asking beat reporters when they come on, or even just like when I cover the NBA, when I'm like, hey, why has your team lost 11 games in a row? Like what's really going on? Because sometimes there's just little things you miss. But it sounds like in your case, like it's not like there's really like a thing we're all missing. Like it's just they weren't able to kind of recoup that magic or that grit that they had in the previous year. Is that right?
Yeah, it starts with that, and then that specific character flaw, if you will, for this season kind of trickulates into multiple different margins that made them such a good team last season. So you talk about last season's Mercury, you talk about a team that was top 4 in defensive rating, which is accustomed to any team Alyssa Thomas has been a part of for the last decade, right. It seems, of basketball. Yeah. Obviously, as you would know well, being in the Northeast. In addition to that, though, I think they haven't shot the 3-ball well, which for an Alyssa Thomas-led team, if you're not able to knock down the shots that she's able to create for her teammates, you're going to find yourself in some dire straits if your offense isn't able to score enough. So the lacking defensive execution level sustaining is one thing. Lacking three-point shooting as a team is another issue. You factor that in with them also having multiple new international pieces with their first time being stateside, just being in a season where there's high, lofty expectations for a team that just missed out on winning the finals just last season. Kind of all of those things in one sweeping blow really just kind of hurt them this season. And it feels like it was defense isn't to the level that it needs to be in tandem with three-point shooting not being there, or vice versa, and both sides kind of bleeding into one another. And it's just kind of led to a season that's left a whole lot to be desired for them. And they just haven't really been able to find sustainable solutions to get them over the hump whenever adversity is hit. And unfortunately, it's found themselves as one of the many teams before the FIBA break that have officially been eliminated from playoff contention.
Right. And then the big thing that's just so wild about this year is that everybody's wondering where Kelsey Plum's going to go ahead of the trade deadline. And I had a lot of people come on the show and make predictions. And the last thing that I thought was that she would go somewhere that was a team that was not going to contend this year, not going to even make the playoffs, right? And Phoenix takes the swing. They trade Monique McCall-McConney, one of maybe the most promising young player on the roster, or at least one of them, future draft compensation for what now looks to be a better chance at re-signing Kelsey Plum in free agency, right? Unless they felt, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, that they were going to be able to turn things around and make the playoffs. To me, that just felt overly ambitious considering the gap in the standings, just like from an analytical standpoint. But is that what was kind of the word on the street when this was going down? Was it this is just going to increase our chances of re-signing her so much? We think that it's worth it. And as a beat reporter covering this team, like, what's your take on the decision to trade for Kelsey?
As I'll kind of answer it from the last to the first. You absolutely, if you have a chance to get a talent the likes of Kelsey Plum in the room, you do that. Sometimes it might not always make sense context wise in terms of where your season is, what it is you're up against, and all of those things. But I think you have to value the in-person dynamic of, okay, this person gets to come in, they get to see what our day-to-day looks like, gets to not have to guess when it comes time to making a decision once free agency ultimately hits, because she knows exactly what it's like to wear our jersey, what it's like to be within our facilities, be bumping shoulders and having conversations with our coaches and players on a daily basis. There's no guessing that has to take place on that front. So I think they valued that dynamic as much as anything. And I also think that they were a little crazy, but I think crazy in the complimentary way of thinking, hey, if we strike a good bit of health, we bring this player in to add to what we already have with Kalia Copper and Alyssa Thomas. We might only have a margin of error of only maybe 2 or 3 games down this 11 or 12 game stretch to end the season, but who's to say we can't do that? Right. So I'm not mad at a team kind of rolling the dice in that respect, but also having a true gauge at just how valuable it is to actually have a person be a part of the franchise before ultimately going to free agency. And I think that was the right decision for them because, I mean, as we see, they didn't have much to lose as far as making that trade and ultimately, losing out on that chance to make the playoffs. But here you are still with 7 games left. I think Kelsey Plum seems like she's day to day at this moment. She might be back for their game tomorrow against the Mystics. But you have that chance for her to also be able to just build on-court chemistry and see and feel what it's like to be on the court with Alyssa Thomas and Kalia Copper. And I think that also is kind of held as valuable as anything else because you go into free agency and you're looking at, if you're Kelsey Plum, what might I look like with the Valkyries? What might I look like with this other team here? Again, there's less guessing that has to happen when you're looking at your situation with the Mercury, but you also have that experience to where I'm sure the front office is like, we can kind of find ways to build around you too. So I think they valued that as much as anything, and I think that was the correct decision for them.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And I have heard that perspective from some people. I've heard other people be more critical. I think there's always like when the initial notification hits, you're like, what is this team doing? And then it's never as crazy and as senseless as it might seem initially. Like I just covered the Jaylen Brown trade. When that first happened, I was like, what the hell are they doing? And then 5 weeks later, you talk to people, you understand better, and it's like it's always a little bit more nuanced than it seems. Almost always. Maybe there's a few exceptions where it never really panned out. But I want to give a quick shout out to our friends over at PrizePicks.
It's a scorching sports summer, and you can make all your picks on PrizePicks. Women's basketball and baseball are heating up, and every football preseason game kicks off this month on PrizePicks. And with big tennis slams and major golf tournaments on the horizon, there's no better place for all your summer sports picks than PrizePicks, America's #1 sports pick app. I've really been enjoying watching Olivia Miles and the Minnesota Lynx. She's been putting on a performance pretty much every time I've turned the TV on and watched her. Have you seen Paige Beckers light it up? She's super fun to watch, and I've been putting her in my lineup basically every game. I can add her points and assists to the same lineup, then I'll add one more player and enjoy the night's games. Plus, I can stack a game winner, spread, or total from the W on top of my player picks to get even bigger payouts when I'm right. One lineup, one app, all the picks. The biggest stars in women's basketball are in the heart of their season, and there's no better place to run your game on the W than PrizePicks, America's #1 sportsbook app. We've got MVPs raising their game to new heights and a rookie class ready to take over, all while teams are fighting for playoff positioning. Make a lineup with player stats, pick game winners, spreads, or totals, and combine your picks in the same lineup. All on PrizePicks, now available in all 50 states, including California, Texas, Georgia, and Florida. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $150 instantly in lineups if you win your first $5 lineup. Download the app today and use code CLNS to get $150 instantly in lineups if you win your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, America's #1 sports pick app.
Looking at the PrizePicks board for Tuesday night's WNBA game between the Portland Fire and the Dallas Wings, I'm going to go with Paige Beckers to score more than 21.5 points. She's been on a tear, and they're going to need a whole lot more from her to survive AZ Fudd's season-ending knee injury. I'm also going to go with Jessica Shepard to finish with more than 15.5 combined rebounds and assists. And I'm going to go with Bridget Carlton to finish with more than 21.5 points, rebounds, and assists. She's had a great season, and I think she'll finish strong. And then I want to ask you just what your thoughts are on whether it's likely that she'll resign. I always want to preface this, like, I know you don't know for sure, or unless you do and you want to break it here, but I imagine you probably don't know for sure. So just being around this team and being around her, like, do you think there's a good chance that she'll be back next year, or is it really going to just a complete toss-up right now to anybody's guess?
I think there's a good chance that she re-signs with the Mercury in this upcoming free agency. And I say that because Kelsey wants to be able to play her brand of basketball, but she also wants to win. And if she's looking at situations around the W that for franchises, and you factor in the fact that most teams just sign players to multi-year deals after the CBA, the historic CBA that they just agreed to, there's not going to be a ton of teams that you can go to and say, I can see myself going here and we can make some noise next season that gives us a chance at contending for a championship. I think that's in favor of the Mercury. I think top end talent, having Kalia Copper and Alyssa Thomas, two players that Kelsey's won a gold medal with and has gone up against both in the playoffs and in the finals in a different capacity. I think there's a certain level of reverence that she has for those two, and I think it's shown up in the way that they've built their chemistry and their rapport already in the few games that she's been available for. And I think the other thing is, and this might be underrated to some, but when you know Kelsey Plum at her core, at least to the extent that she's allowed us to be privy to, you know her respect for Diana Taurasi. And you know how much of an idol Diana was and still is to Kelsey. For Kelsey to be able to be a piece in the new era of Phoenix Mercury basketball, just a couple of seasons after Diana ultimately retired, I think will mean as much to her as anybody else across the entire WNBA. And I think that the rumblings of Diana potentially somewhere down the line becoming a part of the Mercury franchise in the front office capacity is something that will also help to sway even the slightest bit of a decision for Kelsey Plum and if she's going to ultimately come back to Phoenix. I think all of those things in tandem with Nate Tibbetts having just some chemistry built with Kelsey through Team USA basketball all kind of bodes in their favor. Now, I do think that there will be a little bit of you all have to prove it to me in terms of building a complementary roster around the big three that they would establish. But I do think that a recent finals appearance also suggests that this season might be just a little bit of an anomaly more than it is something to have to be moving with caution with going forward. So I think there's a lot of things in the favor of the Mercury retaining Kelsey Plum's talents going next season and beyond. But as you said, that is very much just my personal opinion. That is not me reporting and saying that it's going to happen. But I do think that if it does happen, those factors that I'm mentioning are largely going to be bits of why she says yes to returning. And I also think that the story's still not fully told yet on the season, because I imagine she's back within the next game or so, and she's able to build even more chemistry with Kalia Copper and Alyssa Thomas, in addition to a chance to potentially win a World Cup gold medal with Kalia in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, that's very true. And no, I totally understand. I appreciate your opinion even. And this is something I always talk about. Like, we have opinions, and that's not always reporting, but it usually is informed in like things that we know and things that we're trying to kind of make sense of. So I still find it kind of valuable to hear that perspective. And I'm really curious to see how it's going to pan out, because if she does resign, all the flack that Phoenix got for this trade across the WNBA world immediately is discarded, right? And that's just the nature of how this stuff goes. And so time will tell. Last piece on the Mercury, and then I do want to get your take on just title contenders. Just a couple hours before this recording, DeWanna Bonner, agrees that buyout with the team. We don't know her next move yet. Is there a spot for her that you just off of first thought, like that you could see it be a good fit for her as she eyes a WNBA title and hopes to kind of join a team for ahead of the postseason?
Yeah, I'll start with DeWanna just being an amazing talent. I think for her to be in year 17 and still be moving the way that she is and impacting the game the multiple ways that she did, even for a team that has left a lot to be desired, it's not on the fault of DeWanna at all. She's been about as good as you could ask for or expect. And I think that if she's able to have that translate to a winning situation, she might be a piece that, shocker to nobody because she's just done it so many times before, helps put a team over the top and ultimately win a championship. So through that lens, I think that with the unfortunate news, or not news, but the unfortunate situation happening in Las Vegas yesterday with the injury that they sustained to Nalissa Smith, unfortunately, I see her being a perfect fit there. I think they were on the short list of teams that she was considering once she was waived by Indiana last season as it was. I think there would be a lot of sense there in light of the injury, but I think even independent of Nalissa's injury, she would be a piece that they kind of needed anyway. So I would start with Vegas making a lot of sense there, especially after the injury news that we're probably going to get sometime soon. After that, though, I think Atlanta makes some sense for DeWanna to have them in her Rolodex of teams that she's interested in as well. We still don't know what's happening with Breezy Jones. Unfortunately, I hope that she's back and healthy sometime soon for them, but that feels like there's some uneasiness on that front. So if they're able to just kind of lean into some of the small-ish basketball that they've enjoyed this season and add DeWanna Bonner to that mix, I think she can help them greatly in their front court. And those are just kind of the only two teams that I really see making a ton of sense right now. I think Dallas makes a little bit of sense, but I just don't know what their plan is in light of the AZ FUD news and what they could ultimately do transactionally after that. But I do think that Vegas and Atlanta were on the short list for DeWanna after she did leave the Indiana Fever last season. So it will make sense if she picked one of those two.
That's really helpful. Before you get out of here, you obviously cover the Mercury, but you also follow and cover the entire league. Do you have one or multiple teams that you view right now as like the clear front runners for a WNBA title? Obviously, the Minnesota Lynx top the standings. They're 31-7. They've been the best team in the league all season long. At the same time, Aces have won 3 of the last 4 seasons. So I always think on the NBA side, I always pick like against whoever just won because that's what history has shown me. But in the WNBA side, it's hard for me to go against Las Vegas regardless. And then we talk about the Golden State Valkyries being really good this year. Who's kind of stood out to you? Where do you see kind of this postseason going? The Indiana Fever have been surging as of late. So a lot of good teams near the top of the standings.
Yeah, for sure. I start with Minnesota because how could you not?
Yeah,
they probably have the coach of the year. They probably have multiple All-W and All-W defensive team candidates on their team. They have a complementary faction of role players that do well in filling in the gaps around their top tier players. They have role players that can step up out of their role at any given moment, like we've seen with Nia Coffey and Natasha Howard in multiple respects this season. What a fun team. Start with them as the kind of team that is everybody's playing catch up to right now. After them, though, I think is where it really gets fun because yes, you have the Las Vegas Aces and you have the never-ending dynamic of they have the best player, and the impact that she has on both ends of the floor is something that's hard for any team to overcome in a series. So Asia Wilson she's still absolutely her. Probably going to end up being an MVP this season. And when the lights get brightest on the playoff stage, she just somehow finds a way to get even better and more impactful. So I start with those two teams first and foremost. But after those two, you look at Indiana and you look at the way that Kelsey Mitchell has been playing this season. If their defense can find a way to just sustain to a certain level of just consistency, put that in tandem with Caitlin Clark doing the things that she's been doing on offense and finding a way to just find some timely impact on defense, throw in obviously Aaliyah Boston having another one of those type of seasons and just being impactful in the front court to balance everything with them. I can see a world in which they very easily find themselves in the finals. And at that point, if their offense is clicking to the extent that it's shown to in recent stretches, I find a hard time seeing anybody being able to stop them completely. And then the big X factor for me all season has been the Atlanta Dream. Now, I think some of it is contingent on if Bree Jones is healthy, because I think they are a really good team without her. But with her, obviously they're at their best, and she takes them to a level that might just be impossible to stop when you look at them going up against teams in a series, because defense and rebounding always continue to win championships, especially on the W side. Rebounding, they're doing it historically when she's on the court, in tandem with someone like Angel Reese and Naz Hillman, potentially DeWanna Bonner being in that mix. And then their defense just in general, with all of the activity they can compile. Alicia Gray, Ryan Howard, Jordan, Canada has been amazing this season. I find it hard to see them losing if their offense gets to a certain level. So I go with those 4 teams. I think a sneaky team is naturally going to be the New York Liberty. They've had it hard this season just to find consistency, but they have the talent that if it strikes hot at the right time of the year, we've seen crazier things happen in terms of W teams going on finals runs. So I would keep those 4 plus the New York Liberty in mind. But what are your thoughts on the Golden State Valkyries? Because that's a team that feels like an X factor for everybody this season.
I love watching the Valkyries. I think they've maybe been my favorite team to watch this year, because I love a team that you just know is going to be the hardest playing team. You know, they're just so connected. They're getting every last thing out of their roster. At the same time, I feel like they may lose some of their competitive advantage come playoff time when everybody's playing their absolute hardest every single night. And I know everybody always says defense wins championships, but really a lot of times it's offense. And I think looking at some of the experience that some of these other rosters have as scorers, like I have a hard time seeing how they're going to stack up against some of the other best teams in the W in a playoff series, and just thinking about like their best players versus opposing teams' best players. So I'm like a little skeptical. And I think a little bit of it comes from the fact that I just covered a Celtics team that really overachieved, that had the second best record in the Eastern Conference, that very similar vibes, where it's like on paper, they probably shouldn't have been the second best team in the East, but they won 56 games, hardest playing team every night, great defensively. And then when it comes to the playoffs, some of that is just a little bit more difficult to harness. And Natalie Nakasi is also a mentee of Joe Mazzulla. They're good friends. They've done a lot of kind of cross collaborations. I feel like I see it even more than I want to when I'm watching the Valkyries play. Like I see the connections there. And a part of me does feel like it may be hard to put together like a real deep playoff run without like one more go-to scorer, one more star. I'd love to be proven wrong on that. So it's not like I'm not 100% certain, but just looking at like the Lynx and how dominant they've been, the Aces and just their championship pedigree, the Fever is like firepower. I think those 3 teams are ahead of the Valkyries for me right now, even though the Valkyries have been really consistently like the second best team in the league this year. I feel like most of the season they're number 2 in the standings. And then the Dream have been an X factor, because there are moments where you're like, this team just has it. Like it just has, this physical, the defensive grit, Angel Reese has been playing great. And, but then a part of me is just like Ryan, Alicia, like I feel like they have not been able to be as consistent as some of the opposing star players that we're talking about. So those are probably the 5 teams that I'm like open. I can picture like making a deep playoff run. The Liberty on paper, but I haven't seen one game where I've been like, there it is, like even when they win, I don't really feel it. So I'd be surprised if they do it. The Wings, I think, have really faltered. I love the Mystics. I'm like kind of in love with that team right now.
That's the team I was waiting on you to mention right there. Talk to me.
But I feel like they're like 1 year too early, even though obviously they've already gotten to secure their playoff spot and all that. But I think that, they're going to be even more dangerous a year from now. Everybody's going to be a year better and a year more mature, and this is going to be a great experience for them. But I think it's those 5 teams that I could see making a deep run, with the Lynx, the Fever, and the Aces being like my 3 teams that I could see winning it all most definitively.
Yeah, it's hard to disagree with that trio of teams. There's a world where I think the Washington Mystics can really push one of those teams in that top 3 come first round series. I don't know if they beat one of those teams, but maybe they give themselves a chance and they get a lucky bounce or 2 earned off of the way that they played, which is very similar to Golden State in terms of just how hard and frenetic and activity-based they are with the way they play defensively, especially. It's going to be really fun. I think the parity level in the W rose this season, even if there's some mainstay names in terms of individual players, and even a franchise like the Phoenix Mercury that's just not going to be in the mix this season. I think there's going to be a lot of fun for anybody that's a basketball fan to tune in to W basketball come playoff time. And I mean, crazy enough, we're already at the home stretch. We got this FIBA break that's going to be split in the middle here, but playoffs is right around the corner.
I know it's weird because they're like a month away, but there's like 5 games left.
Uh-huh.
It's a weird setup. But last thing I want to ask you before we get out of here, is there a player that you have really enjoyed watching this year across and any team, Phoenix or not, that you want to just give a shout out to before we log off?
So I'll give a shout out to 4 players for very similar reasons. I'll throw Olivia Miles because why not? Carla Late, Pauline Astier, and why did I just Veronica Burton? I was about to say Gabby Williams. I'm like, I didn't mean Gabby. Gabby's been good, but Veronica Burton. So those 4 players for me, because of the way that they can just go and get a paint touch for their teams. Obviously, Veronica Burton is the straw that stirs the drink for her team, so she gets a little bit more attention in tandem with Olivia Miles than the latter 2 names and Carla Late and Pauline Astier. But I think that I really just enjoy looking at their drive numbers this season. So how frequently can they go get a paint touch, knowing that the defense understands what it is they want to do? And then what are their decisions looking like off of that? They're all finishing at the basket very well for their respective teams. They're setting their teammates up for great success to take catch and shoot threes because they can just go get a paint touch in so many different styles of play. And it's been consistent for those 4 guards all season long. It's been really fun to see them just kind of take their team by storm in multiple pockets and just go get those paint touches, do what they do, get to the free throw line, and just keep a defense rotating and in a frenzy from tip-off to final buzzer. So I wanted to shout out those 4 guards because I've really enjoyed watching them play this season, and especially for Carla Lade and Pauline Astier, to see their impact just kind of grow and rise with the way that the season has gone for their respective teams. I think that obviously Portland's probably not going to end up making the playoffs, but for them to have been as good as they have been so far, they don't get there without Carla Late kind of taking ownership of the offense and the way that that team operates. And then obviously with Astier, her first full season here, it's going to be some struggles that come with that playoff stretch. I think teams are going to really try to find ways to poke at her on defense. But I think if she's keeping pressure on teams with the way she operates with the ball in her hands, if New York's doing anything come playoff time, it's largely going to be because her impact is just completely consistent in the way that busts the game open for them.
That's a great list. Some of my favorite players, I think we have similar taste here. Carla, I think, if the Fire were a little bit better this year, like if they were really on the fence of making a playoff push, I think she'd be getting a lot more attention because she's had some magical moments with that squad. Veronica Burton, I think, remains really underrated and is probably the number 1 player responsible for why they are where they are. And then I always feel like it's just so much easier to acknowledge like the X factor players when a team is like near the top of the standings. But there are some players where you're like, if they were a little bit better as a team, everybody would be talking about this role player. Astia is probably in that kind of conversation where like the Liberty just have been so underwhelming that nobody's really looking for like the hidden gems in New York. But there are some regardless. Yep. Stephen, where can we find your work? Where can people follow along to your coverage?
Yeah, you can just find me on Twitter at Stephen PG3, STEPHEN PG3. I'll just go there because I'm always doing 1,000,000,001 things, watching 2 W teams at the same time consistently between the Chicago Sky and the Phoenix Mercury, also covering the Phoenix Suns as well. So the way that those 3 teams have operated over the past 365 days has kept your boy very, very, very busy. So you can probably find me on any given day talking about all 3 teams within an hour and a half of each other. So it can be a little confusing and sometimes hard to keep up with, but always talking about the game and trying to inform people to a different level, having conversations with players and coaches and just having fun with this media thing. I think it's a blessing to have the opportunity to cover these teams and be so close to them in these capacities. And when you have people like Noa as well, that do it with a certain type of care and a certain type of earnest nature with the work, you get to see some of the beautiful things that are happening on the inner workings of these teams and why they ultimately find themselves being consistently successful. So shout out to you, Noah. Appreciate kind of seeing the things that you've done from afar, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of what you have coming over the next handful of years as things continue to grow and you start getting more attention too.
Thank you, and you as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to join. I know you probably get a lot of these requests, so it's always nice when people are willing to give some time. And everyone go check out Stephen's work. There's lots of great coverage for the teams you mentioned. And let us know what you think in the comment section. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and we'll have more coverage coming later in the week.